I think we are good to go. Yep. Giving everyone enough warning. Let's crack into it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. Pleased to welcome back Andy and Anita from Visitor Solutions, who are working with us on our Strategic Recreation Investment Framework kaupapa. Really exciting stage of the project, I guess, today as we workshop with you, as we're nearing the end, looking to adopt this exciting piece of work. Just a few comments from me, I guess, before I hand over to Andy and Anita, who will run you through the rest of the workshop. Like I said, pretty exciting piece being at the end and starting to see some really good outcomes and outputs of the work that we've been doing with the community, but also our project steering group. Both Lacey and I are also pretty confident in what we set out to try achieving with the Recreation Investment Framework. We're starting to see through the work that Andy and Anita have been doing for us. So, we're excited to share that with you today. I suppose one of the key messages from me as we go into the workshop is this is the last workshop that we'll be having on the framework before seeking adoption in June. We have a report coming to you at the end of June seeking that adoption. So today's a really critical part. If you have any feedback, questions, any reactions to anything you see today, is a really good time to talk about that. We've got quite a bit of time, so if we need to, we can flesh that out. I won't go too much into detail regarding the purpose of the framework because you would have seen it in your pre-reading, but just reminding councillors what our purpose is for the framework. Just a bit of a recap and how we've got here today. And again, Andy and Anita, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. But we have been on a bit of a journey. You'll know that we've come to you a couple of times through workshops. More recently, we did a neat piece of work around, once we've developed the draft framework, but then doing the weightings for the criteria. You remember the exercise we did last time? We're able to talk about that today and the outcome from that weightings. And through those different points, getting feedback from our project steering group inputs, but also mana whenua, obviously yourselves as well. Today we're going to share that with you and then seeking to look for that adoption in June. In terms of our purpose, I think we've covered all of that, but really keen to just start sharing with you today what that framework looks like. So I'm going to hand over to Andy and Anita.
Thank you. Remind of that. So hopefully you had a chance to look through the pre-reading material, which has kind of collated together everything that we've been doing in the last kind of few months. What I want to do in the next two slides is just highlight the key changes that we've made and just sort of some kind of finalising that we're all really comfortable with kind of where we're landing, because these are going to be really important. The investment principles outline what is it that the council is seeking from its investment in sport and recreation, and then their assessment criteria is like, how do we determine whether this is giving us good outcomes or not so great outcomes in that regard. So in the last workshop, I'm just going to highlight some of the key kind of changes that we've made since the previous kind of workshop that we had. You gave us some really strong feedback around in terms of the value for money and that, kind of those core infrastructure things that you wanted to be seeing. So we've worked on that value for money that has probably had the most amount of kind of wording change. A lot of the principles and the concepts are the same, but it's just how we've kind of expressed it. So you'll see that we've got three elements within the value for money around utilisation, so how well will the facility or the project be utilised or used, the financial sustainability, and then the suitability, the kind of the fit for purpose to meet core demand. And you'll see that we've got that core infrastructure in there. The second one I want to highlight is in the wellbeing and the connected community space. So again, the feedback that you gave us is that you want to see a really strong emphasis on the health and wellbeing outcomes. So how will this make the community healthier and, deliver greater wellbeing? So again, we've re-emphasized so in terms of the number of participants and then the range of participants in terms of how well will it kind of go across the community and breaking down barriers and bringing in participation from those who are not participating. And then the last one around the connected communities was around the feedback that you gave us was about how the opportunities for those partnerships with different parts of the community and how well is the project supported. The last one we'll talk about, and I'm going to talk that in combination with the next slide as well, is around Horowhenua's identity. So this one again has had a few little goes in it, and you'll recall that you gave us some feedback that you really wanted to see about what is the role that sport and recreation facilities or investment in sport and recreation contributes to Horowhenua's identity. So we've really framed it in that way and showcasing the diversity of the people and showcasing the history and the stories of your district. Within the criteria underneath it, there's quite a bit in there in terms of sort of ethnic diversity, te ao Māori outcomes, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's quite a wide-reaching criteria. So a couple of things I just want to emphasise. We've been through quite a comprehensive process to kind of try and get to the point here, and hopefully what you see in terms of the words there reflects what you have given us in the feedback. The other thing is that we've really tried hard to make sure it's very much grounded in your strategic context. So there's lots of uplifting from your own strategies and policies around in terms of the words that we've used. But as Mark said, today is the day we want to make sure that we've landed in the right place, so that if we have to make any refinements, we hear about that today, so that we can do that in a really robust way. I'll move on just to the next slide, and then we can pause and have a bit of a conversation if there's anything that you need to talk through. So as part of finalising the framework, we've shared the revised draft with our mana whenua as Council's critical partners, and we've received feedback from iwi hapu, and generally speaking that feedback is really positive. They're sort of like, we really like the fact that you've got the strategic framework and the purpose of it and what we're trying to achieve with it, so that's really fantastic. We did hear from one iwi hapu that they would like to see some specific focus on inequalities for Māori, and they would have liked to have seen some explicit weight in the investment decisions, and so in terms of like the principles and the criteria for providing positive outcomes for local whānau Māori. Now, if you've had a chance to go through the pre-reading, you will see that embedding te ao Māori outcomes is definitely part of the Horowhenua's identity, so it's definitely there. And also that providing for that kind of wide range of health and wellbeing outcomes is there in the health and wellbeing kind of outcomes. So that while there isn't that explicit weight, it's definitely there. So we have gone through this really robust process. Later on in the presentation, we will talk about the roles and responsibilities of different groups and entities. So we'll talk about the role of mana whenua in that process, which will probably give a little bit more context as well in terms of helping to deliver on outcomes for local whānau Māori as well. But we just want to make sure that, as I said before, confirm that you're happy with where we've landed. We think that we've developed the principles that reflect your strategic context, that we've tried to find that balance, because there is going to be different things that you want to try and achieve out of your investment decisions, and we tried to find that balance in there. So our recommendation is to leave it as it is, but that's the point of today, is that we really want to make sure that you're happy with where we've landed. So I'm going to pause there, and if you've got any questions or comments, yeah, bring it back.
I was waiting for others, but yeah, I think it's absolutely brilliant. I like I like how you've displayed it. The weighting, I think, feels right. I particularly liked the weightings in action and how you demonstrated, how it's kind of how that would be calculated, but also the one where I've forgotten what it's called, but where it has the bullet points against each of on the continuums. Because I initially, when I looked at the weighting, I thought, there's still quite a lot of focus on demand or expectation, but actually the bullet points really kind of contextualize how you're going to score it, how you're going to apply those weightings in practice. So, like my gut reaction was that this feels really good, certainly meets my expectations. So, thanks for all the hard work. Looks really good.
I'll hand over to Andy next, unless there's other questions. Sorry, my apologies.
I've probably jumped ahead a bit, so I've just sort of compared the weightings you've landed on versus what I'd originally put down, and give or take, pretty much bang on. Just interesting to the point that in terms of the concerns that iwi have raised, I kind of, for me, that sort of falls within that measure number 8 around range of participants, and on that rating scale of 1 to 5, 5 being clearly evidences the project or facility promotes and enables participation of a wide cross-section of community, all ages and all abilities. There's no reference there to race, and I don't feel that needs to be, because I kind of feel like that bullet point essentially encompasses the fact that we are wanting to provide this for the wider community, for all minorities within the community, and look for projects to support projects that encourage their participation, whether you're a Pakeha boy that wants to play PlayStation to a Pacifica boy that can't get his way to football for whatever reason. So I'm quite comfortable with that, and if the table felt differently, maybe it's just a small wordsmithing to enable that wider piece to talk to that, and just in that bullet point number 8.
Anybody, is that good? Shall we move on? Great.
Great, thanks, Anita. So I guess naturally we're sort of progressing in terms of the conversation around weighting. So you'll probably recall last time I was here, we went through a relatively extensive exercise trying to ascertain where you would rank the respective principles and the criteria that we had there. And so we also undertook a robust exercise with the project steering group, which comprises of council staff and small manoa too. And we then were able to use a weighting exercise using a weighting matrix exercise to then come out with some percentages. And we applied a similar approach based on the rankings that you provided in our last workshop. And so, as you'll appreciate, both within the councillors and within the project steering group and between both groups, there's always variance in opinions and perspectives of how things get weighted and to what degree. So based on that, you can see some variances there, but we've gone through a bit of a moderating exercise as well to land in the recommended weightings, which are on the right-hand side. And I guess a key component of this is actually seeing these getting applied. So what we show here is what it would sort of look like if we had an equal weighting. So in this case, I think it's just over 11% would be applied to each criteria versus using the weighted criteria. So we've just chosen some examples here. They are fictitious. They aren't real live examples. Just to call that out right now. So in terms of how they get assessed, you go through the scoring of 1 to 5 and using the fleshed out criteria that you would have seen in your pre-reading. And you'll see that there's some slight variances there in terms of where the scoring is. And that's where you start getting more of a variance in the scoring of something that's a higher in terms of the sports field upgrade and lights versus the lower weighting for flat water when you compare it through an equal weighting exercise versus the weighting criteria. So you can see that you start stretching out to actually identify where the greatest impact is going to be to inform your decision making. Now I'm just going to jump forward in terms of how this sort of looks and gets applied. So you can sort of see how the scoring works, but in terms of what you will see as councillors is that you'll get sort of a dashboard that will get presented when reports come through from staff. So it looks something like this, where you get the project overview of what it is. In terms of the network assessment, it's understanding how critical that project would be within that wider network, and then when is it required? Is it required in the next 3 years, or is it further on, and you can consider that as part of LTP processes as well. Then ascertaining what role is council going to be undertaking as part of that project, and you will recall from our previous conversation, it could be just ownership, it could be you need to do everything, it could be in a partnership approach, or it could be just through an enabler like giving a ground lease to access land for that development to occur. And then understanding what is actually being asked fiscally of you and of what percentage is of the total project that is being required of council. Then you pull through the impact assessment in terms of the scoring that would have come through in a high, medium, low range, and then from that you'll get the recommendations and actions that would come through that are provided from staff. What we also need to make sure of is that that's what it would look like for a particular project, but it's also really important to look more holistically around the context of what that is against everything else. So you sort of get this type of dashboard here where you get all your projects, and then this would be prioritised by the impact assessment. Then you start looking at the network criticality, and then when is that going to be required. And so this would be a live document that will be continuously updated, because as new projects emerge, they could influence where they sit within those priorities, and also at what stage each project is at, because some will be at planning, some will be right through to having done design and actually want to get into the capital development side of it. And so that when you've got more information on particular projects, how you assess it may actually change. So it needs to make sure that it's right up to date, it's relevant to actually inform your decision making. And then ultimately what we want to see is projects coming off that list, because one, they've been completed, and that's great, and it's going to be delivering on the outcomes and the impact that you want to see for the district. And secondly, some may just disappear because actually they're not viable, and they need to either be rescoped or canned altogether. So that's sort of how we see it from a dashboard perspective, and what you sort of see. Is that the sort of level of information and insights you'd want to see from a dashboard aspect, noting that there'll be other sort of reporting aspects that you get from staff at the same time?
Again, this seems really great. I think it would be an awesome tool. The only thing I'd want to ensure that we have is sort of some differentiation between kind of committed projects, where it's committed, council's agreed to it, versus projects that have either come through community or through maybe it's a proposal come from staff. And so you can kind of differentiate between what we've actually committed to and what's going through the assessment framework, and so is there, and so you can have some visibility, so you can kind of see it within the scope of projects, but it's quite clear to differentiate between those two sort of categories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and agreed. Yeah, we can certainly incorporate that.
Councillor, just thinking off the top of my head there, it's almost like having some categories around, also if it's like LTP funded, community initiated, and then committed. So maybe there's another column there that we could easily slip in. Does that kind of fits, right?
Totally. I think that'd be perfect, because it's actually identifying, whether it's got funding confirmed and the source, or whether it's concept or investigation stage or whatever. Like, I think that would be actually quite useful.
Yeah, easy. We can easily add a column, and I think it's that council role investment somewhere in there. I think.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to suggest as well.
Or stage.
Yeah.
It was around the projects and how they might actually get onto a thing like that. Because I know there would be some aspirational maybe projects that, we've got to consider long term, like an upgrade of, Donnelly Park or whatever. It might not be something that we might be doing in the next 3 to 5 years, but it might be something that's thinking at least on the table at some stage, and how they play into the overall sort of design of the framework.
So I guess I'll just refer back to the process that we showed last time, in terms of that you're going to get project conceptualisation of where this comes from and what you need to do. And so from this process side, so we've used the Sport New Zealand Spaces and Places framework to show the way that you go through development and in terms of operations, and then on the right there is where you will actually apply the framework. So initially you might get a concept from nowhere, and initially you go through an assessment to go, actually, is this a go or no go? And you can that one right there, or you go, actually, yeah, there's some potential impact and some value from this project, and then you would start supporting that project through and put it into the framework, into the inventory.
Right, do you want to?
Yes, so actually my comment. Oh, you got it. Sorry. My comment's stupid, because you're right. It doesn't get onto the dashboard unless it passes the go, no go. But do we want to have visibility of? No, that's fine.
Well, my thing is that when someone turns up to a long-term plan and says, like happened last time, tennis club says that we want to resurface our courts, and we've really only got a window of 2 months basically to decide whether we're going to support that or not. Does that then get on to a dashboard so we say no, but we might future consider that further down the track? And so how they actually get onto that bigger picture is what I'm so curious to understand.
So I think that's exactly right. So you've got the opportunity, when you get that project kind of being initiated, to do that initial assessment based on the information that you've got, to then go, where does this kind of sit? You might go, yep, it's really high impact, it's a really critical project, and it's a small amount of investment. Yeah, let's make it happen. Or you might go, no, we need to go through the process, we need to get further information, we need to do a feasibility study or whatever it is, and then your recommendation would be, let's put it through the process, let's go through the framework, and and then it would be assessed in that kind of point.
Just worry that if it doesn't get into a long-term plan every 3 years, then it almost misses out, type of thing. So if we don't put it in, say it doesn't get in for 2030, then we've got another council will have to reassess in their long-term plan what it might do. So I'm just trying to make sure that we don't lose sight of those sorts of projects that may be a little aspirational.
I wonder. Oh, sorry, Councillor Tamahana. I wonder whether. So I think 2 comments. First is, for the council-owned assets, you should expect that our asset management plans and our activity management planning is driving those conversations at this table. For the things that we don't own, or let's say we've not anticipated it, so you used the earlier example about the Live-In Tennis Club, I just remind the table that we've had conversations in the past where we've acknowledged we could do a better job of pre-engagement with community before you even set the draft budgets, before you go out for consultation. And you might remember how Manawatu District Council does it, when in about October or September the year prior to setting the budgets, they go out to community and say, hey, have you got things in the wind, or are you planning stuff that we don't know about, so that we make sure that we're considering that in scope of our other stuff. So I think part of it's about strategic investment framework and our asset management approach, but part of it's also about how we engage with community to know this stuff before the tennis club rock up at the 11th hour. If we're doing our engagement job, we should have known that earlier on.
Same bit, I would have thought that would be tracked through asset management work and programmed in when
reworks are required, blah, blah, blah. Look, a couple of things from me. Really like the work you've done and how you presented it. I'm just going to, probably not so much to this document, but the Horowhenua identity thing I just wanted to touch on, because it's very much leaning around cultural stuff, but not culture. So I'm not talking Māori culture, I'm talking about general culture. So there's a sporting culture in every field of sport, and there's a way in which people gravitate towards sports. So how do you capture that culture as a part of Horowhenua's identity, given the high prolific numbers of excelled sportsmen and women that have come out of this district? How would that help to inform? Because what I'm really saying is some sports are going to be around forever, some won't be, but the ones that we know we get high representational from are those particular sports. So I'm just dropping that there. I don't need an answer now, but I'm talking about culture as not Māori culture. The other one was, how much will the regional framework go in terms of a decision for us? So, because you're doing a regional framework and it's about how we connect the dots across our region and all different facilities, but will this weighting impact on the decisions we need to make here at home, or will it be considered alongside the regional framework and facility availability, blah, 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 collaboration and stuff? I just wanted to ask.
I think so thank you for the feedback on the Horowhenua's agenda. I think there's some wording we can add in the detail around that, so I think we can deal with that one really easily. And in terms of the relationship between, and when you say regional, you're meaning like the Hirakitua kind of region. So I think one of the key, as outlined in this process, is determining what's the scale and scope of a project. So ultimately, we're going to talk in a slide coming up around who makes the decisions and the roles and responsibilities of that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, decisions to invest are going to be in the elected members' hands. But when you're dealing with a project that maybe is of a really big scale, so let's say you're going to go down the stadium route and it's going to be, or something like that, that's where Hirakitua and the process that is defined is going to come into play, and there's a really nice symbiotic relationship between, because it's the same Sport New Zealand process, and it's just holding hands across those key decision-making points. Ultimately, funding decision will be made by you as elected members, and this framework will help you to be able to determine, is this a good investment for Horowhenua, irrespective of what may be going on in the region, but it still aligns up with that regional process. So that's why we've defined the key steps of when you go, yep, we need to connect the dots here, we need to connect the dots here, and your framework will help you determine whether you want to invest into that.
It's actually about value for money. I was just looking at the three points that you put up, and I suppose the only thing I raised in my own mind was thinking, how do we capture return on investment? Because you put those 3 bullet points there, but there's nothing that actually shows us the value or the return on value for what we invest in. And what I mean by that is the more globalised, the more holistic picture of the sports and recreation that are going on here and what it generates. So when we're hosting events, when the hurricanes come here, when those sorts of things, what is it? Because that's going to also help us to inform where good investment needs to go in the future to ensure those events can continue to be marketed and brought to the district. So I'm just interested in how we might capture something around that.
So ultimately return on investment involves lots of different kind of components. There's an economic return on investment, there might be a reputational and identity return on investment, there might be how does it make your community feel, or what does it drive in terms of participation. So if we go back to the slide, ultimately all of those investment principles are returns on investment in some way, shape or form. It's like how much is a particular project, and it might be a project that's got a lot of kind of a high profile, like a hurricanes kind of kind of event kind of thing, that's probably going to hit the economic contribution and the hora whenua as identity kind of aspect. Whereas, say, if you're comparing it to like a sports field project, potentially that's going to be more in the health and well-being and the connected communities. So what we're trying to say is that the investment principles are defining what is it that we want to see when we invest in sport and recreation, what are the outcomes that we're going to do. One project won't do everything. It'll be ups and downs, which is what Andy was showing and how the weighted aspect kind of works. And what we've been through on this process is saying, well, these are the things that we want to see when we invest in sport and recreation, and this is the weighting, this is how important it is to us. So ultimately we've defined, the value for money and the health and well-being. Those are the kind of the really important things. But economic contribution and hora whenua's identity, they're also there as well, but the weighting is just slightly lower. Does that make sense? One of the other aspects around the framework that we've developed up is like the roles and responsibilities. So who's going to be doing what in terms of making this all live? And if I can also just kind of pick up on something that the Mayor kind of identified around how would projects kind of get initiated and how would you see it. So, and as Andy said, we're expecting the dashboard to be live all the time. So, even projects that sort of are just bubbling away should be kind of being signalled and be on there so you kind of know what's happening. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the council and the elected members are going to be the decision makers on this framework. This is your framework. This is to help you make decisions around where do you want to put your investment into sport and recreation. So you'll be receiving the staff's assessment of the projects and the dashboard. You will be determining the priorities. You will be determining the allocation of funding, whether it goes into the long-term plan or whether it sits there and gets reassessed at a later point. So that's going to be your role, and this is your tool to be able to help you to make that decision. We've also, I hope you've noticed that we have really leveraged off all of your strategic context. And, we don't believe in coming along and making, bringing in some new fandangle thing. We really think it's important to leverage off everything that you've defined as important and you've got in place. So one of the things that we identified was your community wellbeing committee that sits within your wellbeing strategy. And what impressed us about that was the range of organisations and entities and that are sitting on that group. And we think that committee can play a really good role in providing commentary on projects. So given this breadth of that committee, they can provide, community views on different projects, and particularly potentially hearing from different voices. So like we know that you've got the youth voice on there, you've got different kind of sectors of the community, mana whenua obviously sit on there, sport Manawatu so obviously sit on there. So you'll be able to get these wide range of perspectives on your projects. But they're not going to be making any decisions, they're just giving you commentary. I think the other thing is that potentially could identify lots of partnerships and things that you go, we didn't realise that we could kind of connect the dots there and you could get kind of some of those leveraging aspects there. This is also where we see the Sport Manawatu in terms of the Spaces and Places Navigator, in terms of Hiraki Tour, in terms of that regional kind of connection happening as well. In terms of who's going to be managing the process, obviously your staff are going to be doing some fantastic work in terms of managing the whole implementation. They will be the ones doing the project assessments and reporting that to council. They will be the ones that will collect and analyse the information and the evidence to help support that project assessment, and they will maintain that project dashboard. And we're having conversations today. We took them through a bit of an exercise of how they'll use this tool in action. And so we've been talking about how do they keep that dashboard live and what's the mechanism for councillors to be able to kind of have visibility into that. And then the other one that we wanted to highlight is in terms of how projects are kind of initiated. We will be coming back in a few months' time, and Mark will touch on this around the needs, district-wide needs analysis, which will be identifying the kind of the big key moves and the things that need to be included in the implementation kind of plan, and that will be sitting on the project dashboard. But as you say, there are going to be community organisations out there that have got aspiration or have got need, and so they can initiate kind of projects and initiate the exploration. They could come to council and say, we want to partner with you around how this project, and then they'll be providing information for the staff to be able to assess it and to put it into the framework, and then to put it into the dashboard. It could also come from within your own council, and I absolutely love that your chief executive talked about the asset management plan and your activity management plan, because these need to be so working together. This will hopefully inform what's going on in the prioritisation that's sitting in your asset management plan as well. Again, it could also come from the Spaces and Places Navigator in terms of if it's a more region-wide project coming through that process. So we wanted to outline what are the roles and responsibilities and who's going to be doing what, and hopefully that kind of will make sense to you.
To ask where our partners are in that. So I would have considered them were our partners, and then I would have considered, so down the bottom where it's initiating, so we've only got community and council. So yeah, I'll just ask again, because your framework already identified, some of the lack of cultural stuff. So are we going to see them in here?
So they're definitely there in the Community Wellbeing Committee, and I think there's an important role for them to be playing and providing commentary. But I absolutely think we can also include them as a partner as well. I do think they would be they could potentially be an initiator. They could be contributing to that process. Yeah. And ultimately, in terms of the decision making, that I would put that back into your hands as elected members. Allocating funding sits within the elected members' hands, and whether you want to share that decision making is a decision for you.
Got through it quick. Didn't realise I had a slide. Just in terms of next steps, councillors, keen to, following this slide, obviously any questions or further comments for the team to take away. June, we'll be coming to you in your council meeting seeking adoption of the framework, which is why it's really important today we get it right, we nail it in terms of any reactions we've had or anything you've seen. Once you've adopted the framework, what we can then do is some work around that network needs analysis, but also our key moves in our action plan. But we essentially need the framework adopted in order to be able to do that piece of work with the action plan, because it would be a bit backwards if we did it the other way, and I probably wouldn't have confidence in that plan bringing it to you. So we plan to do that in July and August to bring that back and present that to you. So that's our next steps. But really, I think we're open to questions and any comments that councillors have for the team.
My question really is, where to from here? Because from my perspective, there's one or two extra steps that I'd like to see before council adopts this. And so I know that you've engaged with some sports groups in relation to building this. Have we closed the loop with providing this framework back to them? And if so, what's their feedback been? Or is our intent to take this now at this stage and present it back to our sporting groups? Because what I would want to hear and see between now and adoption, or even at the meeting of adoption, is that feedback from our sporting groups around what they think about this framework. Because ultimately, this is a decision-making process framework that they are going to have to adhere to, that they are going to have to build their great ideas around this and have a really deep understanding around how they would take their project and present it in the best way possible in order to achieve that funding. So I'm just keen to hear, I guess, what you think the plan might be to close the loop on that before we're being asked to make a decision.
Thank you for the question. To be honest with you, that hadn't been something we had considered prior to adoption, certainly post adoption. And as you'd mentioned, we had been speaking to the sports clubs around, I guess, need and capacity and membership and whatnot. If that is something that council thinks would be helpful in terms of decision making ahead of adoption, we can certainly work that into our timeframes.
My response would be it would be helpful to, at the very least, socialise. Also considering offering a workshop for those community groups to come along and hear so that you can get that direct feedback from them. Because the issue that you're going to face with multiple sporting organisations is you've got a range of skills that sit around this table, just like this table. And so they're going to have to really have a deep understanding around what these factors are as they move forward to shape up. And I'm not saying we're off track because I align with what you've got. I've got that there. It's that piece of closing the loop that really engages and reaches out to the pieces of our community that are more directly impacted by the application of this framework.
Thanks, Councillor Grimstone. I think we can absolutely achieve that before that adoption. I think that if you're comfortable, the socialisation, I picked up on your word there, so rather than going out for full consultation or getting not approval as such, but if you're comfortable with our approach of at least getting out there and giving you some feedback, and if we can prepare in the report to give you a bit of summary of some of that conversation, that's fine. You're good by that? Cool. Yeah.
Having done this a couple of times now, and working with sports groups, and we have had lots of conversations with different clubs and sports and stuff. I think one of the things they ultimately want is clarity. They want really clear, what is it the council wants to see from a project, and then consistency, so that you go, that's what you want to achieve, and you're going to consistently kind of do it. So I think if we socialise it with it to say, hey, this is what we've worked on, this is how we've got to where we've got to, this is how it will work for you into the future, I think that's going to be the thing that they're going, great, now we know what it is that we need to be kind of focusing on, rather than going and saying, hey, what do you think? I think it's just the way that we frame that is going to be a really important side of it. But yeah, giving that clarity is often the most important aspect.
Yes, and look, I think we're on the same page. I absolutely like the point that Clint's making. It's about when we do it, and for me it's about council taking ownership, adopting the document, then socialising, to use Clint's word, and just put a word in also, we talk sport, but also the creative arts. I know in terms of the long-term plan, the submissions that we're pushing for a performing arts centre for the district, again, if we include those who have submitted to the long-term plan. And just a final comment, I was away for part of this, but absolutely enjoyed the presentation. It's brought great clarity, and having those examples, those hypothetical examples to work through, made it very real for me. So thank you very much for all the work you've done. It's been great.
I was just reflecting on Councillor Tamihana's point about the roles and responsibilities. And I'm not sure what the action is in terms of takeaway from that. But there are touch points across all of these. And so maybe it's just articulating that there's an iwi touch point, because, for example, District Council, well, we're making decisions, and in our agenda papers, whether it's long-term plan or an ad hoc piece, there's engagement. through the community wellbeing, there's a touch point. Through council staff, there's a touch point. And so maybe it's rather than having it as a separate, I don't give, like maybe just articulating where there are those touch points, because I think that might achieve what Councillor Tamihana was, yeah. So it's just as a way forward, so that we're not having the same conversation at a council meeting, like where we might fit in. I think it might just, yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Jennings. And look, if I'm honest, I was reflecting a little bit on your question, Councillor Tamihana, about the touch points, and I think you're exactly right, Councillor Jennings, is that there are multiple touch points in there, and I think the other bit for me as well is that council reporting piece is actually, when we do bring things to the council table, we will be doing that engagement with our iwi and hapu partners, and so in most situations when you see the framework in action is going to be at this table, and so as officers we would have done that work, and so I think there will be that. Plus, in addition to that, to even strengthen that connection to our iwi and hapu partners, are those multiple touch points at those different stages. And I think whilst it's not really clear there, it's definitely in our heads and our minds that was a given, but we probably haven't illustrated that well enough for you. And I would like to think that we've actually got a task to strengthen that a little bit more. So we'll take that feedback away, and it's helpful. It's a helpful conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful, and I really like the touch points. And I've already kind of seen it, how it's going to look on the slide, but I think it can actually provide a really good avenue to actually strengthen your partnership in terms of how this framework is applied and at the different stages, the roles that they mana whenua can play and contribute to the process is only going to make it stronger in a more robust process. So I think it's a really good point that you've raised.
Very good. We will take all that away. That's really helpful. That's been a really helpful session. There's some good things for us to take away, considerations prior to that June council meeting or seek adoption. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, team. Thanks, Anita. Thanks, Andy. That's really good stuff. Yeah, it's progressing well. Thank you.
Kia ora anō koutou. This is a briefing following recent engineers' report about the Waikawa Beach Pedestrian Bridge. So, wrong one. The purpose of this presentation is just to provide that update on the engineers' report that we got done. And then confirm direction. Now, you may recall that at the end of November last year, Council received a petition on the bridge, and following that, there was a request that the Chief Executive bring a report back to Council on the matters raised within that petition. And so the purpose of this is to provide information, clarify direction before bringing back that report. We are within all parts of this triangle, so letting you know what we've done so far, giving you an update, and then just confirming direction moving forward. So a bit of a background here. The Waikawa Beach footbridge, which it is often referred to, crosses the Waikawa stream. It was built in the 1990s with recycled timber. In 2019, Council undertook some strengthening work, and then we have had yearly reports commissioned to ensure the safety. Since that time, at the moment, there is a capacity of maximum of 10 people on that bridge, and the condition is deteriorating. You will recall when we did a visit there that there are some barriers up at each end to kind of limit, inappropriate use, and there are a number of different conditions across that bridge. Council did make a decision during the long-term plan process to set aside some money for Waikawa, and the direction at the last council briefing was that this be considered separately to the access issue. You may recall that at that last briefing, it was asked to find out how well used the bridge actually is. So we did undertake a survey with our community. It was over November, not all of November, part of November, and we actually had 429 respondents to that survey. So we got a lot of engagement. Some of the key findings in that were that most of the people who responded use that bridge more than twice a week. That was the large chunk of it. So, more than twice or weekly. There were a few who responded where it was sporadic across the year. Interestingly enough, that you can see the bar chart to the right there, where the people, the question was, where is your usual residence? So, as you can see, there were, I think it's about 186 whose usual residence is Waikawa, but there are a lot from across the Motu, actually. Some from the rest of the district, but right across, with a number of people explaining that not only that their usual residence might be in Wellington, say, but they have batches that they visit in Waikawa or nearby. So the report that I sent through to you as pre-reading was undertaken by WSP. It was actually part of their wider evaluation of bridge network that the land transport team did. So this was just one of many bridges that they evaluated across the district, which is why you get the report written out as you have, because they are looking at different NZTA funding as well across those other bridges, but not for this one. I just want to point that out. So, as you can see, that the report identifies the maintenance treatments required to keep the bridge in its current condition. So that's, usable with the maximum of 10 people on it for the next 10 years. And then it compares the cost for an estimated like-for-like replacement. James wanted me to highlight that at the end of 10 years, that's kind of the maximum life we would be looking at for the bridge. It would need to be either decommissioned or replaced at that stage anyway. And so the report recommends replacement in terms of financial cost. So it highlights that it will require significant maintenance in the next 1 to 5 years to remain serviceable in the medium term, which means up to 10 years. Estimated cost of $265,000 to maintain over the next 10 years, with at least $100,000 needed next year, and that's just for maintenance. A like-for-like replacement is estimated by them at around $360,000. and therefore replacement is the more economical option.
Sorry, Lacey, what's
Yes.
the life expectancy of a replacement?
Great question. I might need to come back to you on that. I don't have that at hand, sorry. But
Years.
yes, it would. Yes, it does depend on the standard. I have Daniel Haig looking at me who might know.
Oh, it really depends on how much we want to spend. In this case, the budget is estimated at 360k, which is very much a like for like. If we come back with a decision to replace, we could look at a range of options which will have different lifespans depending on the material types. But yeah, probably the key message from the report is that maintaining isn't an option. This is one that's really clear cut that it's either demolish or replace. So if a bridge is required there, the recommendation is it needs to be a new one.
Thanks, Daniel. But can certainly look at what different lifespans of a replacement would look like. So that was the like for like that the engineers looked at. We've also we reached out to a couple of different companies on some options just to get an idea of what replacement costs would look like. So this is the picture there is a suspension bridge from a company that we spoke to. It's a similar size and challenges in terms of not being able to access the other side of where the bridge needs to go to. And so that's what they've kind of based the, quote on, which was $450,000, is a suspension bridge with 20-person load restriction, but would be designed to hold up to 60 persons in case of overloading. It doesn't touch the river, which was something I discussed with them because of consenting. And it would also have improved access for pushchairs and wheelchairs, because you may recall that access to the current bridge isn't great. If council wanted to look at options with unlimited loading, it would be closer to $700,000. So these are the things that we have looked at and considered with different companies at the moment. So this question isn't quite right. The question is, what additional information would you need ahead of a report coming to council? And ideally we would have that report to you next month.
So, question, Lacey, in terms of our decision making, the growth projections not only within the village itself, but also within the wider use of the beach and so on, because that 450 or 700k option has to be considered if there are projected, significant growth use of that area.
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. Something for us to consider and add into the report. Yeah.
I guess in terms of looking at the option here that you've submitted here for the unlimited loading, keen to see whether you can test that with the community, because I tend to suggest it's probably not needed, but does the community want an unlimited loading or feel they need an unlimited loading? And in the same way as we've got deep pockets looking to restore access to beaches, is there some community funding that they would potentially look to contribute towards the higher spec big bridge option rather than the one we'd probably be able to fund?
Burger King makes you faster. No real questions, just a comment that I just want to see this hurry up and get on with it and done and replaced, and trust you and the staff with the recommendations you put forward will be the best option.
Hey, thanks for the information. It's actually quite insightful. For me, it's probably just that life expectancy of a bridge like this, and I guess I look at like timber, whether it's H4 or H5, and the life expectancy as a result, because I guess if we are to spend a bit more, then and it's a better return on investment, I guess we're better to have that information up front, so we can at least be informed.
Yeah, can I just understand on that point? So the report that you're thinking you'll bring, will it actually have like a gold, silver, bronze option? You know, like in terms of cost and life expectancy. So there's kind of a range, so that we can give an indication. Or is the report just going to ask us for a budget to procure something up to the maximum value? And then I've got a further question, which
Thank you for your question, Councillor Jennings. In terms of the budget question, you'll recall that the replacement of the Waikawa Pedestrian Bridge was in the LTP budget, and so then it was combined at that time. So whatever we spent on the bridge, the remainder would potentially left to investigate vehicle access. So in terms of the options coming back, we would have a few options based on the information that we have.
the angle of my question is that because this is a combined bucket, this is not a situation where we just say, okay, well, there's a budget line, go away and do it, because there is an impact on other decisions, and it could constrain or impact other future decisions. So that's where council does need to have a little bit more of oversight and a touch point around the optioneering. The other question I just wanted to flag was we're very lucky, like we had with the Maritana family, that we've got a private property owner on the other side of the bridge that generously allows the community to utilise their land. So do we have assurance that have there been some discussions that give us enough confidence to make this investment decision that access is going to be maintained in the future, and that we're not building a bridge to nowhere where access could all of a sudden be removed, as it would be their right. But yeah, I just want to make sure that we have that assurance somehow locked in.
Good question. Yes, we have had conversations with the Walkers who own that land on the other side of the bridge, but certainly can have further conversations to ensure that the report reflects that assurance from the family.
I see. I understand why the gold-plated option of 700k for unlimited loading would be there. I get that, but for me, I would see that as total overkill. The chances of more than 20 people on that bridge at one time at Waikawa would be pretty damn unlikely. But get why it's there. In the yes, right. Yeah, exactly. In terms of the other slide, there's about, I think the bridge like for like was 370k, was it? 370. Does that include consenting? Or not? No, it doesn't. So consenting would push that up quite a bit. And have an indication of what consenting would entail and what the fish hooks might be around that?
We've had some minor discussions regarding consenting, and which is why we've looked at solutions that don't touch the river, because in initial conversations, particularly with Doc, that there is a strong recommendation that any further work, whether it's on the current bridge or any new bridge, doesn't touch the river.
God help us. I'm just going to make another comment that your report and questions to fill me with the confidence that this is going to work, and hopefully we can have a report that highlights how we can expedite this process without allowing councillors to get down into the weeds on the timbers and things that we're using.
Well, I'd have to respond to that, because this is exactly the lack of financial discipline that would create problems, because we have a finite pot of $1.2 million earmarked for both bridge replacement and potentially vehicle access. And so I can see exactly how this would play out if you get your wish, Councillor Proctor, is that we would end up potentially with the community telling us go for the highest spec option at $700,000. Throw in another couple of $100,000 for consenting and other things, then your pot of money is entirely gone, and then council is constrained in terms of the other decisions that it may wish to make. So the Waikawa community deserves it.
Thank you, councillors.
I'm going to ask a
Yes?
different question because we're talking about new and stuff. But have we ever looked at second-hand bridges around the country? Yeah. And if there's any availability, and if someone wants to gift us one to Waikawa, and we spend some money on repurposing that bridge to suit what we need?
That isn't something that we have considered with this particular project at this time, but we can certainly make some. We'll make some inquiries and then show where that has got to within the report.
Yeah, build a bridge, but it's got to, the best bridge for the best money, and don't make it a Golden Gate.
Thank you. I've got a lot of information for the report, so you can expect that shortly. Thank you.
We also plan to bring a report on vehicle access in June as well. So we wanted to talk about timings and sequencing on that.
Yes.
We'll go. Thanks, Jacinda.
Okay, thanks everyone. So the intention after we've signed off the annual plan a few weeks ago, I thought it was important because we're still going through the process of finalising growth. We've had some while we were able to set the rates increase at a level that was below the long-term plan, as we talked through the long-term plan process, it was clear that the main drivers of the rates increase were due to increasing costs of water, and particularly as well starting to balance our budget in the water space. Because of that, the impacts of the annual plan and the rates increases associated with it do have quite a big variance in terms of distribution to who is impacted across our community and by how much. And so what I thought was important to do was, before we release the rates calculator at the start of June, is to make sure you're all familiar and confident with a level of detail at a property level, so that if you are contacted by by members of the community, that you felt comfortable in terms of those conversations. So in terms of the pre-reading, I did include, there was some messaging, and as well in the press release we gave an indication to the community as well that the rural community would be less impacted and the urban community would be more impacted. And in the pre-reading that I provided, we did have a spreadsheet there which gave, I think, 30 plus examples, which Lynette kindly prepared for me, that gave you a pretty good indication of what's happening across the district. So in terms of just some key messages, and please jump in and ask questions as you would like to, we had a total rates increase of 10.2. In terms of the growth number that we're seeing at the moment, it's probably going to be somewhere between 1.05 and 1.1, rather than the 1.7% that we originally anticipated when we set the long-term plan. What that means is the average impact on individual households is more because there's less new houses to share that across. That won't be finalised until we actually bring you the rate setting paper on the 25th of June though. The most significant message, and this was included in the press release, is that just over 85% of our cost increases are due to three waters. And that is consistent with what we've talked through that process, through the long-term plan process as well. When we talk about unfunded depreciation and talk about debt-funded operating costs, as we've set the long-term plan, as we worked through setting the financial strategy with the aim of becoming and having a fully balanced budget by year 27-28, key within that was the fact that a massive part of our debt-funded operating costs and also our unfunded depreciation sits in that water space. And one key decision that was made by the council a few years ago to keep the rates increase lower was to increase the amount of debt-funded operating costs for water. And so start unwinding some of that is what's driving some of that significant increase. Overall, as a council, we've been really efficient, and we've continued to find efficiencies and savings across the council. And that's evidenced by the fact of, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but our rural base is actually seeing, in some cases, a decrease in rates. So where they're not connected to water and wastewater, they're actually seeing that other than those costs, we're actually starting to reduce our costs overall, which is a good thing. But for those customers that are connected to water, and it links to our conversations about three waters and how we can help to make that more efficient for our community, as that does continue to be a significant challenge for both for us, but also for our community. This slide it's nothing different than you've seen before, but I just wanted to make sure you've seen things in a few different ways for those that like to understand things in different ways. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. This first column gives you a view of what we actually set in terms of rates for this financial year, and then what our rates have set, what we've budgeted, and the annual plan has confirmed the rates will be for next year. Within that, you can see the waters area are the significant reasons why there are those changes, being more than 85% of the increase. Within that 85%, a significant portion of so the 3.3 and the 2.1 in terms of increases for water and wastewater, 3.8 of that relates to the fact that we're moving towards fully funding our operating costs and fully funding the cost of depreciation. There's another key factor that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of and is conscious of. When we set our long-term plan last year, and I'm going to flick to this, I'll flick to this and I can easily flick back if you'd like me to. One of the key rules in the Local Government Rating Act is that your fixed charges can be no more than 30% of your total rates. One key thing within that, though, is that 30% excludes water and wastewater. So there's a limit of 30%, but then on top of that is water and wastewater. For us, because water and wastewater are fixed charges,
our community does have a significant level of fixed charges that it pays. And what that does is it has a proportionately higher impact on those lower value properties than the higher value properties. And that's because everybody pays the same for those fixed charges, regardless of the value of their property. So those are some of the key reasons why that is the case. When we set that last year, we were starting to breach over that 30% cap in terms of the level of fixed charges. And so a decision was made for the last financial year to shift 2.15 million from the representation and community leadership targeted rate to the general rate to make sure that our fixed charges stayed below that limit. So last year we landed at 29.7% in terms of the level of fixed charges, and that was only achieved by the fact that we actually, rather than charge, if we had kept everything related to representation and governance, which includes the democracy costs, it includes our strategic planning costs and some of those other costs like that, we would have actually breached that limit. So there was a decision made by the table to shift some rates into the general rate so that we didn't breach that cap. This financial year, we didn't need to make that adjustment because we were below our 30% limit. What that means, though, is that our general rate, because it hasn't had that shift of an additional $2 million into it, is actually reducing overall, and the representation and governance rate is increasing. And we'll talk about it in a second. I'll jump to you in 2 seconds, Councillor Jennings. That means, though, that for those smaller properties, they're actually going to receive a bigger hit because that representation and governance rate is a fixed rate that's shared across everybody in the same way. The drop in the general rate is those that are going to benefit from that drop are those that have a larger land value. While rural won't benefit as much because they only receive half of that charge, those bigger value properties will receive more of a benefit from that drop. And I know this is complicated rate structure stuff, but I thought it was important that you all get a sense of it. Councillor Jennings, before I jump into this slide, did you want to ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind myself and perhaps table around what sits inside the representation and community leadership portfolio, because when we transferred the 2.15 million into the general rate last year, we kept inside the representation and governance the direct costs associated with democracy services. Was that right? Whereas everything else, so that's planning. Yeah, are you able to just tell me what's inside the portfolio of representation and community leadership, just so we're all clear?
Yep, sure. So it's elections, governance, LTP, annual plan, annual report, community board, strategic projects, some portions of strategic planning so strategic planning as well, and then governance and executive support. So last year when the table made that decision, because I know I remember you talking about that quite clearly at the table, was that there had to still be those core democracy costs needed to stay within representation and governance, but there was an appetite at the table so that we could get below our 30% limit to shift some of that to make sure we were compliant. From a policy perspective now, we don't need to shift that, but it does have an impact because of previous decisions that we've made. So to give you a bit of a sense of, these are 3 properties that Lynette's pulled for me that give a view of, so this is, these are in Levin. You can see that this is a larger land size property. Their increase is $405, 6.97. The biggest impact is that small property with a small piece of land having the most significant of the increases. And so in some of the information that we provided as well,
some of the larger retirement villages were some of the ones as well that saw those larger increases. And the reasons for that, I'll jump to you in a second, Mayor Bernie, is because they have a number of properties and a very small plot of land associated with that property, they're not getting the benefit of that general rate reduction, but they are feeling the heat of the waters changes and of the other fixed charges changes, including that shift back from the representation and governance rate. Mayor Bernie, did you have a question on that one?
I was just trying to do some arithmetic in my head in terms of what the total rates each of those properties might be paying. Does that give a percentages sometimes can give almost a false narrative in terms of it would be interesting to know, the valuations maybe of what those were and what the total rates were, because I suppose if 10% means they're paying $4,000 per year, is it?
What we'll do after this is we did have a spreadsheet that we sent out, but what we'll make sure we do, if they're not in there already, is we'll include these 3 properties into that sheet as well, so that you can see the ones that are associated with those as well.
Just a quick, and I know this is probably a dumb question, but I kind of think there are no dumb questions. But so if 85% of the increase in rates is down to water, how does that play out when rural ratepayers don't pay for water?
That's a great question, and that's the biggest in terms of the impact. How that plays out, is some of our rural properties, and you'll see that in the examples. It is in your pre-reading, but we'll send the link out as well just to make sure. Is if you look at within that sheet, there's a summary of, is it connected to wastewater? Is it connected to water? In those instances where those properties are not connected to either of those 2 things, they are seeing increases of 0%, or in some cases a reduction of -1%. And that's how that plays out in terms of that impact. They're seeing the benefit of the general rate reducing, but also the fact that the charges that they are impacted by are not water ones, and so the impact for them is not as large. And because we've made some savings and efficiencies in other areas of the business, they're receiving the benefit of those, but not incurring the additional water costs.
So, it means that only 15% of the rates increase falls across everyone. And there is, it's an unintended consequence of success, because you've told us as an organisation we've got to cut our cloth, we've got to find savings, we've found those savings, but we can't find those savings in water, because that that's where the increase is going in the trajectory of the LTP. So it also feeds into your decision next week, right, about the sustainability of water services in our district.
That's the other bit as well, is that challenge of financial strategies. You could say, gosh, maybe we didn't want to move so much towards a balanced budget in terms of water. If we hadn't, and we had pulled that back a little bit, then we wouldn't have the room in our borrowings to be able to do the growth work, the treatment plant work, and the other key work that's needed from the capital side. So because we are right up against our limits, the levers we've got to pull are very limited. And the conversations about water are inextricably linked to this in terms of the room that the community has to move with investment because of those challenges. Yeah.
This might be a dumb question too, Jacinta, but can you just, in a layman's term, tell me why we have to move that representation and where we put it into the target rate, take it out of the general rate? Why do we have to do that?
The key reason why we had to do it last year, we don't have to do it this year.
Well, that's what I'm waiting. We've done it, so why are we changing that?
Well, we're changing back, and that's a question that ultimately this table could make, is we did it because at the time the limit was we were breaching our limit. So to meet our legislative requirement, we had to make that change to get below the 30%. from a policy perspective, this table, through the revenue financing policy, has a a preference to pay for elections, governance, LTP, community board, strategic projects through a targeted rate for rep and governance. And so, without a specific decision to decide otherwise, it needs to stay in rep and governance. But I did, for example, have a look at what would happen if potentially the table were to decide to move the same proportion of the rep and governance rate back into the general rate. That would have an impact in terms of lessening the impact on those lower value properties. As a quick side, sorry, I don't think I actually have it on the slide. It does soften the blow, but it would need to be a decision made by this table, because in terms of the annual plan, you would need to make a formal decision to make that shift to enable that to be the case. I didn't want to assume that you might want to do that, because this is strictly in line with everything that you've decided and in line with the annual plan. But at the same time, it's important that you do have an understanding of what might be possible if there was an appetite.
That's a 15% differential between those impacted or not. Well, the impact is 15% difference, which is quite substantial.
Just on that point, are you able to provide a sort of benefit, non-benefit sort of piece on that? On the two options? Would that be, if you left it in or took it out? Is that a great tranche of work, or?
Yes, and kindly Lynette has already done that for me, just because I thought that we thought that might be something that might want to be considered. It's not what we have agreed, and it's not what was decided, but so it's up to you. What we can do as part of this is we could circulate that around the table. If there was an appetite, that is something that we would need to decide at one of the next two council meetings, so that the rates setting paper that decision is fully made in advance of that.
Without putting pressure on you, Jacinta, it would be a late item for next Wednesday, just to give sufficient time for Lynette to prepare for rate strike to prepare the rate strike paper, and then all the mechanics that sit behind that. And it's not a difficult piece of work to provide you that advice, but it requires a debate around the council table.
Just to get a sense, is that something that the table sees value in preparing for debate?
It's that thing about it's all
already. Now we're going to go.
No. Seriously, it's all about unintended consequences. The need to be flexible. That's just my view. Jonathan's now going to send me out of the room.
Well, I guess when we're talking about some of the stuff, we've sort of got to take the good with the bad. I think there's probably two sides to it, but I'm not too supportive.
I would probably appreciate, and this gets a little bit into the weeds, but if we take the whole representation and community leadership budget, I'd want to see some breakdown of the different components inside it, because for me, it's like there's a portion of that which should absolutely be rated on an equal basis, that everyone pays the same for access to democratic processes in those parts. Maybe there's an argument in terms of planning and LTP that should be based on capital value in terms of the general rate, but I'd really want to understand similar to what we did last year, around really being clear about what the different portions are, because I'd be looking for a bespoke solution rather than a all or nothing type approach.
I think our advice isn't going to enable that. I think it's really important council stays within the bounds of its revenue and financing policy here, and the option that Jacinta has signalled, you can do that within your revenue and financing policy, but if you want to relitigate components of that particular rate and what goes where and how it's funded, policy conversation, it's not a council kind of one day decision. But we can certainly provide you advice about what you can do within your revenue and financing policy, and you could do something like this within your revenue and financing policy without consultation, but not if you're going to change components of your revenue and financing policy.
So just around, because I'm just interested to understand the visual of the table, because my point was we moved the 2.15 into that because of the potential breach of the 30%. We no longer need that. So, yeah, should we be? And I'm trying to understand this, looking at moving it back because of.
Or just leaving it there like we moved it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm not going to ditch it. I'm just asking. Yeah.
I'm sick of you old guys changing your mind every 5 minutes. We made a decision last year. We doing it.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Last year, from a compliance perspective, and it wasn't a principles-based discussion around whether it's appropriate for how the cost of those providing those services should be distributed across the community. That's
Just in advance of testing whether you would like advice to come back for the council report, to give you an indication, Eaton Place, for example, which was going to see the increase of $461 and 14.51. That would then become $408 and 12.87 in terms of an increase. If you shifted, I don't have the total rates bill in front of me. Pardon me? I think based on what, I'll give you those three from a principle perspective or a policy. If you think that kind of move is something that you would look to want advice for, I don't think heaps of evidence today is going to change that. I think it is generally in terms of it's a principle-based decision really for you in terms of where costs sit and how increases can be balanced. So in terms of for example, the one that is $441 and has a 10.31% rates increase, that would then be that would see a little bit of a decrease. And then this would see a little bit more of an increase, so this would go up to 9%. Yeah, and the pink one would go up a little bit as well because it's got a larger land value size. So it is a principal decision for you in terms of, do you want to provide some benefit for those small value, small land size properties with some mechanism that you have, or are you comfortable to stay where you are and we'll proceed?
Yeah, well, I like that difference. It's material enough for me to change my mind now. Sorry, I just wanted to. Yeah, I am. That's what
Go on, John.
Yeah.
I'm hearing from the table that no, in terms of the extra advice, you're comfortable to go ahead? Okay. Does anyone else have any extra questions? So just for you, Councillor Barker, the rural area, in terms of that last question, they kind of go between -1% and 2% is generally where the rates increases will sit. And then in the urban side are kind of in the 13 to 16% area, with retirement villages probably those that are seeing the highest ones. So just this will give you a sense when you get the phone calls coming up as people start to look at their rates increases. It will give you a sense of the conversations that you can have with them and the reasons why.
I suppose our energy will be going is about making sure we communicate really transparently the why. Yes, so why are some ratepayers getting a decrease, and why are the connected ratepayers getting such an increase? And telling the story about the impacts of waters, but also the impacts of the cost efficiency work that this council mandated.
Oh, can I just ask one quick question? You probably don't know. You probably can't answer it, but I'm looking at the retirement village. Does that get passed on to the people in the retirement village, or so it does get attributed to them all? So there will be a dramatic impact on our economy.
Yeah, not necessarily, because it depends on how. Like some of the smaller retirement villages, they have, because they've got other legislation that determines how they can set their fees. Some of those fees have already been set at the start of their them buying into a retirement village, and so the scope to actually increase them is quite challenging. So that is something that could be something we hear from retirement villages, small and large, is their ability actually to pass on that cost, because it is constrained by legislation.
Okay, thanks everyone.